Welcome to the Housing Transformation Summit. My name is Monica Wheaton. I'm the Director of Customer Success at ECI Software Solutions. ECI has 5 different products: Mark Systems, Lasso, LotView, Build Tools, and Bolt, and actually we just acquired InSearch, so we're excited to be here and to be part of this, this whole summit. So thanks for joining us. We are very thrilled to have you here at this inaugural event. Here with us this week is a great collection of about 100 builders from across the country, including builders from Texas, Massachusetts, Oklahoma, Washington, and California. We really appreciate you having taken your time out of your busy schedule to join us. And we also want to really encourage you to seek out the solutions, products, and peers that can help you take action on improving your business and things that you can implement in the new year. Through the general session presentations, your one-on-one meetings and sponsors, and during the peer group boardrooms, seek out those golden nuggets that will help you take your business to the next level. Capture those ideas with specific action items on how, when, and who will be involved with implementation. This session, this housing transformation session, is about action. So in short, please make your experience here at the summit count, and we will go ahead and get started now with the program. So again, thank you for joining us. This is establishing a culture of continuous innovation on structures and construction. This presentation today is really going to be focused on working with people, working with your product, and working with technology to continue to build and innovate as you're building your homes and to continue to find those efficiencies as you're building. This was the description that was on there. Today on my panel, and I'm not going to be talking for too much because I know we have a very full presentation, I want to introduce, I'm Monica Wheaton, like I said. We've got Joshua McMahon, who's the Director of Construction from Schell Brothers, Ed Hauck, who's a Senior Consultant at Builder Partnerships, and David Burleigh, Consultant from BOQ Virtuosos. So I'm actually going to go ahead and turn the slides over now to Joshua to talk about the people aspect of this presentation.
So people, the big part of continuous improvement when it comes to people is creating more of a culture of openness and the ability for people to come and ask questions and be vulnerable. I think that's where continuous improvement truly starts. And just to go through some of these slides and touch on some of this stuff, manage with the goal of continuous improvement. That's the goal that we're working to achieve, and we should be working to achieve that always in our business. Create a budget and standardized schedule for all homes. I think this kind of goes without saying. Big thing for me is establishing goals centered around the improvement and stick to 1 to 3 goals. I think as home builders, sometimes we make a mistake of wanting to conquer the world at one time, going from 25 homes to 150 homes or some other massive number versus focusing on 1 to 3 things at any given time and then investing the necessary time into correcting and improving that goal. And that could be a 1-week timeline or a year or 2 years, whatever time it takes. Review this item weekly, monthly, and at every completion and continue to improve. Develop a scoreboard so everyone is engaged with the progress towards the goals. I think this is probably one of the biggest things. When you have a scoreboard and everybody can see how their individual input is affecting the output of the company, how they're working towards achieving that company goal, they're more bought in and more invested in supporting your goals and what the company's aiming to achieve. Next key thing is making adjustments towards your progress. As you're growing and as you're learning from different challenges or opportunities that you're faced with, be comfortable with making changes. I think as leaders, it's okay to make a mistake, own that mistake, make the correction, and move forward in a different direction. Oftentimes we find ourselves not wanting to let go of an idea that we had because we think it's our idea, and if I admit that I made a mistake, then you're gonna think less of me as a leader or less of me as a manager. And I'll tell you, as far as building a culture of continuous improvement, that's the worst attitude we can have. Show your people, your team, that you're vulnerable and you make mistakes too, and they'll start to open up and really grow, and that your company will really hit the next level. Trade partners. I think trade partners in our industry today is really just a good talking point. For purchasing side, we use the term trade partners to get a better price, but I want to challenge everybody to take a more active effort into building trade partners. Everybody we contract with is a subcontractor. but you build and you create trade partners. And that comes from asking your trades about their business. What's really going on with their business? What are their constraints? Where are they struggling? What can you do to help them, right? How much lead time do they need to perform their activity? How many days do they need to perform the activity? Do you remember the times, even today, where I'm the builder and I say, it's gonna take you 3 days to do this rough-in, and you say, no, it's gonna take me 4? I said, no, that's good, 3 days, got it. And we move on. Every single house, that trade partner, that sub fails, and we look at him as he's the problem. No, we're the problem, we created that problem. So don't go against what they're telling you they can do. Help them improve to get to the 3 days. Show them support and genuinely care about their success. I think I just touched on that a little bit. A big thing for me is sharing your corporate goals with them. We talk about our corporate goals, but are our corporate goals aligned with their corporate goals? If I want to grow from 50 to 100 homes next year, does my HVAC contractor have the ability to staff up and support that need, or do I need to go find another trade partner to help facilitate that? Don't take a good trade partner and ruin them because I like them and I want to go to 100 homes. So be okay with going and find another one. Your trade will actually thank you for it. Maybe not in the moment because he doesn't want to lose any work, but he will come back and thank you for it. Empower your team and your trades. I think this is probably the biggest thing that everybody should focus more on. Myself as a director of construction, I need to make every decision, right? But that's not actually right. I don't need to make the decisions. I should be able to fly to Phoenix and do a conference and sit on a panel with this great group of people and speak to you while my team is empowered to make the decisions they need to make and continue moving the machine forward. And when they have questions, I should make myself available to answer those questions. So during the break, there was a gas line that's not buried deep enough, so we're creating a problem with flat work. I took that phone call, asked him what his thoughts were. He said what he wanted to do. I empowered him to move forward because he's making the right decision. Now he's gonna feel strong, and that's an assistant construction manager making these high-level decisions, but I don't need to make every decision for him. And let me touch on this. I trust that he's gonna make mistakes. I trust that he's gonna make the wrong decision, and I'm gonna support him to get him through that wrong decision and come out on the other side. So empower them to make the decisions, trust that they'll make mistakes, and support them to get them to the next level. That's how we're gonna create the next generation of trade partners and team members. And that's how you prevent people from leaving too. They'll be with you forever. And then one other thing on this one, ask your customers how their experience was. Customer surveys, we really just wanna see the 5s and 10s or whatever your scale is. But what's the real feedback in it? It's just information. Receive that information, apply the information. Maybe that's your quarterly goal, is to improve quality. Big thing for us right now is trim, right? We're getting beat up on trim on our surveys. So we went back and talked with our purchasing and the president of our division said, if we spend $300 more per home, we can have a better quality trim. No brainer, let's spend the $300. The customer's telling us what to do, that's an improvement we can make in real time and find another area to make that reduction in price, right? So that's a culture of continuous improvement where everybody's on board and everybody's bought in. And we're gonna win that customer because they're gonna say that we listen to their feedback. Steps to getting started, analyze your process, communicate, purchasing quality schedule. I'll tell you the big thing is communication. Communication is everything in our business. We absolutely suck at communication in our business, and we have every means and way to get you whatever information I need, and we still fail. We have to communicate more effectively, and we have to listen to understand, not listen to respond. So I think those are the key things, active listening. Review what you currently track. Can't hit on that enough. Identify and discuss current choke points. I'm sure nobody has choke points in their business today because everything's running like a top, but identify those choke points and work on ways to work around those choke points. Don't just push everybody through the choke point. How do I solve it? Where am I getting hemmed up, and how do I get around it? Again, speak with your trades. What's your trade gonna tell you? The individual physically running the ductwork knows more about your home than we do. Ask that individual, how do I build a better home? And revise your current schedule and budgets to reflect improvements. Constantly improving, reviewing each cost code, reviewing each activity. Is it necessary, and improving that stuff. Showing support for your trade contractors. Take the time to learn what is required. I think these are all touched on. Leverage technology to improve communications. This is a big piece that I think we are failing in our industry. I think we're 20 years behind still, even though we have the technology at our fingertips. We're not failing to use it. We thought that we could take the technology and give it to a 50-year-old or 60-year-old superintendent that's building homes for his entire life and say, now you're gonna build homes with this phone, good luck. That's a failed project. We need to bring in people to help educate and teach this next crop, and then bring in new, not per se younger, but individuals who are more technology savvy and teach them how to build homes through the technology and then teach them how to make those decisions. And the biggest thing for me is always invest in win-win relationships. Benefits, I think, are pretty self-explanatory, and I want to pass it on because I don't want to take up too much time because Ed's got some good stuff.
So the one thing you mentioned was the 300 hours in trim. We talk about this a lot. The 300 hours in trim, not only did you get more customer satisfaction, your warranty probably went down more than 300 hours.
Yeah, the warranty will definitely go down. The painter was constantly complaining about the additional work that he had to spend on the trim. The trim carpenter complained about the trim because of the additional work they had to do. So it's really not $300. $300 is just the number that we track.
It's a very misleading number. So I'm going to focus a little more on the field and the process. And Dave and I do a lot of work together, so mine will kind of dovetail into Dave's. So this last year, I've never talked about lumber as much in this last year as I ever have in my life. And by the way, I started working for my football coach who was a builder when I was 15 years old. So I've been carrying lumber for a very long time. I've never talked this much about lumber. So the problem is, I gotta teach my field how I am estimating lumber, how I am designing houses. What we do is we just decide how to design a house. Somebody does an estimate, but nobody shares it with anybody, okay? Meanwhile, us as builders are dropping $50,000 on the ground out on site, and we don't manage it. We don't think about it, okay? So what I want to do is, I did this for Mark Systems and Monica a few months ago. This was literally a 60-minute presentation. I got to cut it down to 12 and a half or something like that. So it was hard trying to get this down. But what I want you to do is teach your trades, your field team, what to look for. The first thing is, when Dave and I were talking before I came here, Dave spent a lot of time in Phoenix a long time ago, and he told me there's a lot of panels and trusses down here. Way back in my previous life, I worked for a builder who did nothing but panels and trusses. I also spent time working in a panel plant because I was an ex-carpenter. So one of the things I want to do is I'm going to start looking at the cost of my components. If you don't ask about the cost of components, you're just getting a giant bid. And what's in that bid? You have no clue. It's just a number. It's going to tell you it's $20,000 for panels or $15,000 for trusses, whatever. I want to break that down. Okay, the other thing that's going to happen is, depending on how I build a house and assemble a house, I'm affecting how much time it takes to frame that. I was just in Indianapolis a couple weeks ago, and I pointed out all the bad designs that were causing the framer time. Sat down with the framer and asked him, if I straighten this out, how much time would you have? By the way, that was a lot of time. It was about 32 hours for a really poorly designed second floor over top of a roof. So look at that kind of stuff, okay? It really adds up. Another thing we don't do, and when the lumber crisis hit, if you were sole sourced, you were stuck with that one person, right? You had one rep, and you better stay tight with them. If I always have multiple reps, I can compare the different bids, get different ideas. But if you didn't do that before the lumber crisis, you weren't going to be able to do it, okay? Another thing we start doing is make things a little easier, okay? I want to break things down in the estimate and how it gets delivered into sub-bundles. It may come out in one load, but I want each package kind of sent out by itself and then band it back together again. First of all, then I can teach the framer, stop undoing the whole pile. What was happening when 2x4s were $12 a stud? They were walking off the job sites, right? So what I want to do is I want to keep everything bundled, and I want to teach my superintendents and my framers about that, share with them. I also want to have it separated by use. Again, Dave and I can do a great estimate, but if I don't share this with the team, I got no chance of the framer doing this. I drop $50,000 on the ground and then tell them what to do with it. And we wonder why we have 10% variances. Depending on where you are, I like having a preferred method of how lumber's being delivered. And by the way, I ask this all the time doing seminars and doing on-site assignments. Nobody usually has a scope of work for a lumber delivery. We just tell them, go drop $50,000 on the ground, thank you very much, and tell me when the next increase is. You got to tell them how you want it. If they start delivering how I want it, you actually help them because they don't have any more hot loads, hot deliveries. The hot deliveries kill them, by the way. Every time your framer calls you up at 3 o'clock and says, I need this tomorrow morning by 7, you just cost that lumber company a couple $100 if you're lucky. You're not becoming the builder of choice in your market. So I want to have this lumber load delivered in a manner the framer can actually use it, okay? On my PO, the first thing in my PO is a sill plate. Well, why is the sill plate on the bottom? Because that's the way it was on your PO. That's how they stacked it. So I want to think about how I want these things bundled and banded, and I want them labeled, by the way. I have a specific way of doing it. I adjust this a little bit from how I do it, from my market in the Northeast, a little bit different. But I want to have things delivered in order. If you're on a foundation of some sort, not a porch slab, I want my first floor deck on the top. Why? That's the first thing the framer has to do. Pull it off and use it. If I have first floor wall panels, okay, that's next. Or the disassembled material is coming that way. In a market, we have second floor decks. That's labeled. It's probably still in the same lumber load, but I want it labeled accordingly so they know what's being delivered and what's being used. And by the way, it's all labeled, okay? The other thing is, if you can get a lumber yard to give you your LVLs, your headers, and everything else pre-cut and labeled, that's expensive material. I do that all the time. I want them labeled by floor section. Second floor walls. If I'm using LVLs in roof trusses, where are they coming? By the way, they come with the trusses, not with the walls. By the time they get to the trusses, if you put them in the walls, they're gone. Thousands of dollars gone. The roof load, depending on how it's being done, I like that coming at the end if I'm a truss builder at the end. We're working in Louisiana next week with a builder down there. His roof system's coming out in advance. Very expensive, long lengths of material. By the time he gets down to it, it's all gone, it's all cut up. Framers love coming up a long piece of material. I don't understand, but they do it. I want it all done that way. So organize it the way you build in your market, okay? Somebody needs, the next thing is the lumber delivery. I just told you, for me, one of my custom homes in my market, the highest was $90,000 for a lumber load for a 4,000 square foot house. You think I'm dropping 90 grand on the ground and not counting it? Yeah, we're counting it. Who's counting it? First of all, the lumber companies have gotten smarter. They're actually taking pictures and having the inventory sheet double checked. There's the guy who's loading it in the back, bunking, and then there's a truck driver who's second checking it. And a lot of times they're taking pictures now. They're doing better than we are because we're always blaming them for short loads. So in my old world, in my current world, my superintendents will check loads. In my scope of work, my framer was required to check the loads. I want multiple people on that, okay? The other thing I do is I want all that lumber rebundled when possible at night. When lumber was at its all-time high, in my market, we have forklifts everywhere. The framer's putting the forklift blades on top of it. People are coming by and just stealing loads right and left. That was a lot of money. One of our clients had a whole load picked up by a white truck that afternoon. The framers were there. Guess what? It wasn't the lumber company. They stole the whole lumber load. Just came by and picked it up. So I want to be very careful how I treat my material, okay? Another thing is we don't tell our superintendents, let alone our framers, how to frame a house. When we walk houses all the time, I see constantly different floors, different buildings being framed differently. Have yourself a book of details. Okay, Dave's working on this right now for one of our clients. We'll have a book of details exactly how they're framing the house. How is the header being framed? Single studs, double jacks, 2 foot on center, 16 on center. What is it? 2x6 wall here. As we do plan reviews, we see all the time, there's no way that they can actually frame the house because there's no information on it. The builder, this August, I sent Dave the plan to have it estimated before I went there so I could walk the house. He goes, dude, there's nothing to estimate. There's nothing on the plan. There's no details. We had no floor joists, we had no wall details, no truss details, nothing that we expect everybody to be able to deliver it. I gotta teach everybody in the field how to build this stuff, okay? The other thing is I like to share the lumber list. I want everybody to have the lumber list. The framer gets the lumber list in advance. I also want to tell them where I'm using this material. I also want to get the framer to give me feedback, okay? I got a 3,500 square foot custom house coming up in a couple weeks. I've already met with the framer, already got the feedback. I want to make sure that everybody knows how the material is going to be used, okay? I got to teach everybody the process. In larger companies, the trend has been on bigger companies, have somebody specializing in this. It's too much money. On average, Dave and I on a good builder are finding 5% from a good builder. More than that on builders who are not managing the process, okay? So after the house is estimated and released, the next thing that happens is I am now giving that, and now the superintendent owns that list and that responsibility. It's up to the superintendent at that point to manage the lumber, the materials, and the framer. What we do a poor job is we don't teach them all this. We just don't. We got to teach them all this. I want to hold them accountable. I want them to know how that house is going together, how it's supposed to be framed, how I estimate the house. I also need the superintendent to have working knowledge of all his empowerment documents, all the vendor agreements, any trade contracts, scopes of work. Another thing that went away a long time ago were checklists. It's coming back now. I was a big fan on checklists because every frame gets punched out and checked the same exact way. My framer, his crew is Hispanic, the checklist, he did it in Spanish and English. When he's finishing backing out of that house, I don't want him leaving and not having everything done. He wanted the checklist. He took my checklist and made it bilingual. It's real easy to do. It saves you so much time and money, it's crazy. But I want my superintendents to have all that information on this. So the next thing is my superintendent's 100% responsible for all the placement of material, protecting the material, where it's being delivered. In my world, we send out the plot plan and a PDF circling where it's going, exactly I got a plan where all this material is going. If you're doing tight lot lines, there's no room for error. I don't want to move, I don't want wasted motion. I don't want moving material, okay? As I'm using it, I want to make sure the superintendent, the framer, understand how I'm using material, don't unbundle things, and never touch a lumber load for a different house. Never, ever cross-collateralized material, okay? Then at the end, I want to check for all the excess material, get it bundled and returned. And then I've got to start looking at those lumber lists so I can adjust those lumber lists going forward. Production builders, what we do is we adjust the lumber list, but we don't realize we have 20 houses in released and have that mistake 20 houses all across the county. I want to go look at those and make those adjustments in some way, shape, or form. And I want to get those credits back. There's lots of money. I also want to look for the waste. I want to go dumpster diving. When I was in Indianapolis, I've never seen so much waste on a framed house, 2,200 square feet, panels, trusses, but had a 30-yard dumpster worth of scrap. They were just chewing up material, but nobody ever managed it. Said to the superintendent, where's all this material coming from? Well, they send a lot out so we don't run out. Bad answer, by the way, okay? That was expensive material. So I want to make sure my superintendent can teach my framers how I designed my house, okay? How it was supposed to be assembled, the details. I spent a lot of time and energy putting this house together in a certain way so to be cost effective and well designed so I don't have callbacks. I got to teach my superintendents how to do that. We do a lot of superintendent classes. Our average age of superintendents is going way down. We're bringing kids in, which is awesome. Now we got to teach them. They didn't all come from the trades like they used to. So I want to make sure that the superintendent knows how materials are being used and being installed. I was taught way back when, I have to know the plan inside and out. Any house that I sell right now, I can pretty much tell you how it's being assembled, joist, everything. The sin for most builders is we love collecting houses. We all have too many houses. If you ever analyzed your plans, you probably have about 80% of your plans being sold or only 20% of your product line. We have too many houses. We can't keep track of it all, okay? So the last thing is I want to make sure I'm using a frame punch list checklist. All my supers are using the same checklist all over the place. So the last piece of this is I want the superintendent to organize the load, check in deliveries, placement deliveries, how do you cover them? And for me, right now, the weather's getting horrible, okay? Do I want that lumber all exposed? I don't. I'm gonna find some way, shape, or form to cover it. By the way, my lumber yard, when they get I-joist, they have these giant tarps that come with it. Just ask, they'll cover it. I also wanna start looking and finding out about back orders. I gotta start talking to my lumber yard. If I'm using I-joist, what series can I get? I wanna eradicate the back orders. If I don't communicate, I'm gonna get back orders. What series? I might need to change the series. I might need to change what manufacturer. So I wanna eradicate back orders. The other thing is I wanna make sure that we do not have material damage. When that's being dropped, I wanna protect it and make sure I'm not having issues. Again, I want to make sure my superintendents are paying on time, depending on what systems they're using. I like line pay, where I just want to check off it's delivered, the purchase order approval, and I want to make sure everything's being paid for timely, okay? That's how I want to keep my lumber yards wanting to work for me versus somebody else. I got a couple quick pictures, then I'm done. Pictures are always worth 1,000 words. This is a really nice organized lumber pile. I was working with this builder. Big houses, everything's organized, labeled, very little bit of waste. This house is dropped and estimated from the office, and the lumber yard has to follow that plan. So another builder I was working with, things were very disorganized. They had multiple people bidding on parallels and LVLs and multiple deliveries, thousands of dollars laying around. This builder here, I thought he was in the lumber yard business. All we had was lumber everywhere. This was right before lumber really went crazy. It was thousands of dollars literally on every single building. There were townhouses, and they were just inventorying too much material. So I want to make sure, start dumpster diving. Look at this material. This is all bracing that could have been used again, used for something else, used for forming. It was literally 2 30-yard dumpsters of material. So real quick, I want to look at plan reviews, make sure I have the best plans. The best plans get the best deliveries. I want to use my in-house estimates, not outsource. I want to know what I'm putting out there. I need a master list for every single house. I want to have, I don't just bid anybody, I want qualified suppliers. What does that mean? I don't waste their time bidding until I know who they are and I know I'm going to give them work. I got to have a good buying strategy. If I was sole sourced this time last year, you were stuck riding the wave with that lumber company. I always had multiple companies and it gave business away to multiple companies. That's a good buying strategy. Quick pay discounts. By the way, a lot of people forget about asking about that. If you're doing quick pay or even 30-day pay, what is that discount? It's available, ask for it. I talked a little bit before about delivery efficiencies. I want to talk about how material gets dropped, how it gets delivered. I want to make sure trucking, by the way, is a problem now. I want to work with them so I'm not wasting the trucking. If you're not wasting the trucking, you're more apt to get more materials on time than somebody else. Again, we talked about the lumber specialist. Somebody has to own this process. The frame book of materials. I need to know how every house is being framed. And then the last piece is the trust management. I really want to make sure that I am looking at my components, looking at the assembly, how I'm buying them. Can I save money by doing things a different way? There's a whole bunch of stuff to that are worth a lot of money. So that's it for me, and I'm off to Dave now.
So my name's Dave Burleigh. I wanted to talk to you about how we can use technology, primarily in the world of estimating. Before I start, you're going to hear me say the word UPM over and over again. UPM is a purchasing philosophy. It's unit price measurement, which basically says instead of doing lump sum bids, get a price for every part and piece that goes into your home. And your bid is effectively the number of times you're going to use that part times the cost of the part equals your bid. When we talk about estimating, for cost control, we're really looking at 2 different types of estimating. The first one is the more traditional. It's doing 2D UPM bill of quantities. In a 2D, we're using, generally nowadays, we're using a digitizer, or we could scale it out, old school. One thing that we do like to see now is if you're gonna stay with 2D estimating, is at least start to transfer over to assembly-based estimating. If you've ever done a 2D estimate, you'll find that by time you're finished with the plan, you've retraced the same thing 10, 12, 15 times for different components. Assembly-based estimating just says, let's trace that once and build everything that goes in. If I'm gonna be doing exterior walls for my framing, why don't I capture my drywall, my insulation, my exterior cladding, get anything and everything I can into that wall in one shot so that we're becoming more efficient. 2, it also helps make sure that your estimates are equal to one another. There's nothing worse than taking 2 similar houses and getting 2 totally different numbers because you did things a little bit differently in the estimate from one to the other. The assembly base takes that out of the equation. Like Ed said, proper details are key. At least once a day, we'll review a plan for someone and have to tell them, sorry, we couldn't even begin to estimate this because there's no details. Anytime that we're making assumptions when we're estimating, we're just opening up that checkbook. If we're not telling people specifically how we want things done, then we're just putting ourselves on the hook for whatever they've decided to do instead. Third part is we always want to make sure that we document our standards. And a couple of reasons we do that. One is if then I can do an estimate, Ed could do an estimate, Josh could do an estimate. We're all going to come up with roughly the same thing because we all follow the same standards as we are doing that work. We also want our trade partners to know how we did our estimates. That helps alleviate that back and forth once you, as you're switching over to UPM, your trade partners are going to push back and say, no, I came up with a lot more drywall than you did. If we shared with them how we came up with our number, that helps alleviate that argument because now we're just dealing with basic geometry. And the answer is the answer. And then the fourth part is we want to take how we're going to use that material and include that in our scopes of work as well. So we have these details, but we also want to make sure that we're making it clear to the trade partner, this is how we use our material. As costs continue to rise, we're trying to become thinner and thinner on what we're allowing for waste. The easiest way for us to help manage that is to let the trade partner know what that expectation is so that they understand we're not taking the longest board every time to cut that foot that you needed. We want to make sure we're spelling that stuff out so that they're really clear on what we're looking for. As technology has improved, we started looking also at 3D material modeling. BIM modeling, when you're doing it on the architecture side, we can also do that in the estimating side as well. So that it's not the full investment of getting everything into BIM. We can model it much faster when we're doing it for estimating needs. Really critical for those major cost codes. It really helps out with lumber. It can help us out with our foundations, our drywall. We're going to capture some stuff that isn't really all that impactful, but again, because we're using assemblies, we're going to go ahead and capture everything that's touching those walls. If you're considering 3D modeling, the biggest portion that we look at today is you want to make sure that that model is viewable in the field. Having a nice, beautiful model that you can look at on your computer doesn't mean anything if your framer can't pull out his phone or his iPad and look at it also to understand what you were thinking. And then same as in our 2D, anything that we put into practice on that 3D, we want to make sure that we're spelling it out, that people understand what our expectations are. Just a quick example. So this is a home that's been built for 30 some odd years now, I believe.
In one of our estimating seminars, this was a very easy textbook house we used in class to teach people. I forget, it's all even numbers, very simple house. And unfortunately here, you can't spin it like
Correct.
you can on your screen.
So this is an example of a 3D material model. So in this particular model, we were looking at foundations. Our framing, including our trusses, are actually designed into this model. So that we can get a very precise count of what we need for this house. Every corner is drawn out, every opening is drawn out. We know to the T what the material usage is. So now we're only dealing with true waste. What is that number that we need for twisted studs, a reasonable amount of miscuts, things like that. So when we're talking about technology, we don't want to implement it just to have it. First thing we touch on is when we're doing our estimating, all too often, we'll get these great estimates, and then when it comes time to actually put that into our system, that's kind of where we start to get log jammed a little bit. So all too often, those estimates then get converted into lump sum so that we can quickly get it into the system and start cutting purchase orders. It really defeats the purpose of what we're doing. We want to break down to those parts and pieces. That's the same way we want to buy them. I don't want to buy my lumber package. I'm going to buy each individual stick that I need. Easiest way to do that is to investigate the ways that you can take your estimate and get it into your system without all that manual entry. One, it's much faster. More importantly, if any of you guys have ever sat there and just keyed in a bill of quantities for a home, you're going to make mistakes. As you're sitting there typing them in, you're going to fat finger something. It wasn't that your estimate was wrong, it was that your entry was wrong when you did it. So look for ways to automate that process so that when you finish your estimate, you can just transfer it directly into your system, and you're ready to go, you're up and running. We want to automate as much as possible to take advantage of repeatable functions. In the estimating world, that's a lot of our assembly based, as we're building those out, is really focusing on what are those constants in a home. I have for every estimate that I do, the first one I hit is called base house. And it's got, typically for most of our clients, anywhere from about 120 to 150 items that are just the things you have to have. They're the easy things to forget. And again, we're trying to build on that efficiency by just knowing we need these, so let's get them in there for moment one so that we can move forward. So I'm gonna actually skip this one if you guys don't mind. I wanna focus on the more important parts. So first off, when estimating, so I've been doing this for about 17 years, working with clients across the country. The number one thing that we see that sets us on a bad path immediately is we start to go into these tech spaces, pretty much any tech space, certainly with estimating, and we want to believe that our superintendents are just gonna be the end user of this. And that's not really the case. They're a part of the solution for us. So we definitely advocate that as we're starting into that estimating process, we wanna include our field superintendents in that process with us. They understand how your home's being built. They know intimately what products are going into the home. I'm a purchasing guy. I'm all data. And I'm not gonna make the same decision as Ed, who's been out there building forever. We wanna collaborate from the beginning and make sure that we're on the same path. Once we have those estimates done, we wanna make sure that the builder has access to that same technology. We can do a beautiful 3D framing model, and that means the world to me from the number side. But if my builder doesn't have the opportunity to get in there and actually look at it themselves, then I'm setting them up for failure. And now my estimate's not worth anything because I didn't give them the keys to hold that estimate to reality. And the last part is we really want our supers to be that last line. We can do a great estimate, we can buy it out, we can get it to the trade partner with no problem, but now ultimately I need that superintendent to be the one that's gonna hold that line. That's gonna make sure that that material is being used the way that we estimated it, the way that we designed it to be used, and to be the one to hold the trade accountable to make sure that if they're misusing it, that we correct that immediately, so that we're not opening ourselves or opening the checkbook more often. The second common failure that we see is the first time that the trade partner sees this estimate is when you put it on a purchase order. If that's the first time they've seen it, it's way too late. The trade partners also need to be involved from early in the process. We want to collaborate with them on how we're doing the estimates. Important, I'm not saying we're gonna do what the trade partner tells us to do, but we do want their input. But then we wanna help guide that process so that we're becoming more material conscious as we're doing those estimates. Same thing with the database. So all too often you'll get an eager purchasing person that'll create this beautiful database with all the parts and pieces. Google usually is a huge part of that. Doesn't mean that much to the trade partner. The trade partner has terminology that they're used to seeing. We want to make sure that we're incorporating that from the beginning so that their purchase order is coming out in a way that they can understand it. It makes sense to them. It's useful to them. Typically when we do that, we try to work with our preferred partners. So if I have 5 framers, I may only include 2 of those framers in that discussion because I don't want too many voices that are going to muddy the process. I want to go after the ones that are really my vital trade partners and have them be a part of that decision from the beginning. And then the last part is, if any of you have gone to UPM already, we want to make sure that we're communicating with the trade partners why we're doing this. When you first go to a trade partner and say, we're going to stop lump sum and go to UPM, most common response is, you're ripping me off. We want to make sure that we're clear up front with them that this isn't about anybody taking advantage of anyone. This is about just using our material more wisely, managing our processes better. And we want to make sure that we're communicating to them that it benefits them as well. This isn't a one-sided thing. They're going to also get mutual benefits as you roll forward with that process. As we're going through the process, we want to check in early and often. So once we get the system up and rolling, we want to make sure that we have key metrics that we're going to measure against. In the estimating side, typically what we're really looking for is VPOs. What was my VPO spend per house before I implemented the technology? I want to check in just a few weeks into it to see what it is and continue to track that to make sure that we're on the same path. We need to be realistic. When you roll out a new system, it's never going to be 100% flawless the day it rolls out. We know there's going to be problems. We need to understand that up front. We should also be communicating that up front. Make sure that our trade partners know, hey, this is new to us too. We've tested it, we've vetted it, we feel really good about it. But when you get that purchase order that's really weird, let somebody know. Don't freak out. We know things are going to happen initially as we work those kinks out. A big one that I like to, from my purchasing days, we love to have these fights, is we need to know the difference between an estimating error and a variance. That's important to know. Did we spend extra money because something was wrong? There was theft, there was damage, another trade caused an issue. Was it a true variance, or is my estimate wrong? If my estimate's wrong, I need to go back and fix that. But I don't need to go back and fix my estimate because something walked off the job site. So we need to be very clear when we're tracking which one of those buckets it falls into. And then the last part is we want to poll our trade partners regularly to see how they feel. My favorite generally is my HVAC guys seem to always be the ones that complain the most when I go to UPM. And that survey day one is going to tell me how much they hate me and my family and my dog and everybody around me. 3 months in, they're saying, hey, this isn't too bad. And by about month 6 to 9, then I start getting the phone call saying, hey, Dave, do you know somebody at this other builder? Could you talk to them and see if they'd go to the same process? Once they start to reap the benefits, then they're going to become fans of yours again, and that's what we want to track through that polling, is get a feel for how they're dealing with it, as well as if scores go up and then all of a sudden they start to drop, now we know we have a problem. Something happens somewhere in the system that needs to be addressed so that we can keep that moving forward on the right track.
Cool, and I think that's the presentation. So I did have some questions for you, and I just also wanted to bring it back to the topic. So as you have heard, we talked a lot about standardization, measurement, units, units of measure, just really getting down into the detail. And you're probably wondering why you're at a program for focused on innovation, and we're talking about standardization. Do any of you guys want to answer that, or all of you could probably answer that?
So the standardization helps, the consistency is what we're going for. And in the end, I want the consistency for the buyers as well. You know, I want the perfect house every single time. You know, why would the goal ever be to deliver a standard house? I want to deliver a perfect house every single time. So the best way to get that is every single one of my trades, I want them to know what my standard is and do it over and over and over again and replicate it. And you were talking about how you manage your people that way. I know a superintendent's going to make mistakes. By the way, I was a superintendent, I was 23 years old, no training. The first year I was a superintendent, I built the wrong house on the wrong lot. Why? Because I didn't get any training. You know, and I learned, I never did that twice. You know, but you need the standardization to get the end result as good, as perfect as possible. Buyers are tough these days. It's not getting easier.
Yeah, and without that standardization, you really don't know where you are, so you can't really innovate either.
Right.
You can't really make improvements. I think we were talking one time about a story where you were talking about the trades, and the trades know best on the job. Have you ever had some ideas come from the trades on?
Yeah, we have plenty of great ideas come from the trades. Even our HVAC contractor, I think, is probably one of the best HVAC contractors I've ever dealt with. And this particular contractor's taken 6 days to do a rough, and these are fairly big houses, but we're working on ways to improve that time, and myself and the owner of that company have gone to jobs when they're doing rough-ins, and I was asking the person actually doing the work, how could we be more efficient? What are different things that we can do from a builder side to have the job more ready for you? How can we clear that path to reduce the time? Because you talk about UPM, which is really touching material one time, installing it one time, only using what you need, which reduces cost on our side, but it also reduces cost on the trade side, which improves their stuff. And that's not going to come from the owner of that HVAC company. That's going to come from the individual physically pulling hard duct out of his van and duct sealing it. So we've had plenty of great conversations with the guys. In fact, that one guy, this example, the individual, when he's done, he's like, I didn't mean to step on anybody's toes. And I'm like, if anybody knows best on this job, it's you. I want you to keep stepping on toes.
Great, thank you. And Ed, you used lumber as an example as far as product is concerned. Is that something you can do across other products as well?
Yeah, I mean, we picked lumber because Dave and I spent a lot of time recently on lumber with what's going on, lumber shortages, everything else. But that goes from foundation to the very, very end. You mentioned the trim. We've done that value engineering. I hate the word value engineering, but I want to go make sure I'm putting the proper products in. So if I have a first-time buyer, what's acceptable there is not the same if I have a move-up or a luxury home. The same exact thing you did with trim, we did with paint. I got tired of seeing paint, so I decided it was our goal for a quarter. I said to everybody, we're going to make paint go away. In the end, I spent more money on paint. It wasn't just the paint, it was the process which I applied to paint, how often, when we did certain things. Working with the drywall company, we used all our variances to get down to that, worked with all our trades, your premium trades to figure that out. In the end, we pretty much took paint and eradicated it. It was about $750 for a first-time buyer and about $1,500 on a move-up. But in the end, we had about half the 30-day list after that. They start going down. We got more customer referrals. Our referrals went way up, all because we stopped the stupid word paint from showing up everywhere I looked. And it was a team effort. Two different painters, two different manufacturers, our superintendents, and it took literally about a quarter to come up with a plan, and we tried it. And you mentioned this earlier. You try it, it worked pretty good, and I do what? I make it better and enhance it and keep doing it. And at the end, in about 6 months, we saw the difference. We spent more money. In the end, about a year later, I could prove that money was actually saved. Mm-hmm. So all products, by the way, it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Kitchens, windows, you name it. There's by using your trades and your manufacturers, that's how you usually find these things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, great. And then on the technology side, there typically I find in building, there's a lot of people that fight the technology, especially in the field. How do you overcome that to get some innovation?
So I think the first part is, and we talked about, is the initial buy-in. All too often, whether it's a new ERP, it's a new way we're going to do scheduling, we tend to introduce that to the field when it's time to use it. And that's not the right time. If we're involving people from the beginning, they're part of that decision process, they're part of the design, they're part of the implementation, it's much easier for them to then feel comfortable with it. I've been with builders where we introduced it to the builders the day we rolled it out and handed them a brand new iPad. And then you need to figure out how to use this plus use the system because this is official as of today, versus calling them in initially and even as simple as. So you're going to be doing your scheduling mobile. What's the preference? Let's initially decide what platform do you guys want to use? What sort of, do you want a Surface? Do you want an iPad? Do you want a laptop? Include them in those decisions from the very beginning so that they understand that they're a part of it and it's not just those at the top saying this is how it's going to be, because then we should expect a lot of pushback.
And then do you find not only do you get better buy-in that way, but you get other ideas as well? Or?
Absolutely. So like Josh said, generally if I'm meeting with builders, especially starting to talk about what we're going to do on the technology side, I feel like I get really good feedback there. Because being that I'm comfortable with tech, something that may seem complicated to them just seems really easy to me, so I say I'm fine with it. We can do it that way, versus getting that feedback of what do you really do on a daily basis? What's the easiest way? Do you really get that feedback on what's going to make their job easier so that I get the benefits that I wanted from the tech, but I'm not hindering their ability to do their job?
Well, you're able to use the tech because once you get the buy-in and then ownership, once the superintendent and everybody owns that, they say, I want an iPad, I want to use the technology. Now they own it. Now you've changed the entire game of what you're building, right? So everything we're talking about ties into that piece. So it's really getting their ownership. So even with building the schedule and coming up with activities, ask for feedback on that. But here's the key thing is you have to be open to receiving that feedback. Because we talked a little bit about variances. So I come up on the production side, more superintendent related. So every error in the field is typically estimating. Any estimators or first guys? Right, so every time it's always estimating. Now, I'm just joking, right? But that's really how we always talk. Because it's easy to blame it on somebody else. Well, it's your fault, or it's your fault, it's your fault. And I said, well, maybe it is, but what piece is my fault? What piece do I own? And that's when we really start changing. But it's really listening and receiving that feedback and then allowing them that position at the table. That's all most people want.
That's great, cool. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so we wanted to also open it up to see if anybody has any questions of the panel.
Is anybody still awake?
Yeah.
Oh.
When is the best time to do a takeoff of a framing material of the house?
So that really depends on what your business model looks like. For medium-sized and larger builders, typically what we advocate is let's actually do a framing takeoff initially based on the master set. So let's get your plan, your base plan, all your elevations, all of your options as those standalone components. And then as you start to roll those into production is to do just kind of a quick refresh to then combine that specific house. Because especially if you're a builder that does a lot of stacked options, then that lumber list will change as you start to stack those options. We may lose a little bit of lumber. We may need to add some as we're hitting more intersections. So really the best way is master set with just then a quick refresh. When we're talking to smaller builders, custom home builders, then we typically want to do that estimate as soon as the plan is ready for the site specific. We want to get it done in advance. Takes a little bit of time. You need to have multiple people reviewing it to make sure that it's a good list. So trying to do that estimate the day before you're going to order lumber usually isn't going to be a great option for you, which is really where the master set comes in, is at least you have a good idea of if somebody does this plan, this elevation, and these dozen options, you at least have a really good idea what that list is going to be, knowing that you may just tweak it a little bit for that site specific. The method I've always used is we actually separate the team into two pieces. You have an estimator, that's the smart one. That's the guy that knows construction really well. That's the one that's going to manage those assemblies, ultimately going to be the final set of eyes on the plans. But then we also implement people that we refer to as tracers. That's the person that's going to actually do the tracing, the bulk of the work, because estimators are hard to come by these days. After the crash, most of them left and went on to other things. The ones that did stay, the days of getting, a $20 to $25 an hour estimator are gone. Estimators are worth their weight in gold. So we like to build the system around having somebody that's the estimator, who's that decision maker. But then these tracers, I've actually had a lot of success getting people straight out of high school. We can get them cheap. We can teach them how to do it. They can do it over and over and over again, as long as there's that estimator that's overseeing it to make sure that the right practices are being used, that the right decisions are being made. But again, it comes back to the details. If we had those clear details, if we had clear scopes, then we can overcome some of those issues in the plans and actually still get really accurate estimates out of them.
And I would say, from the field side, I would love to see all estimators spend 2 years in the field, walking homes and touching it and knowing what it feels like, because if you haven't lived that life and went through the grind, then you're not going to receive the feedback from the people in the field because you don't understand it. So I'd love to see more individuals coming out of high school or college and 2 years in the field and then moving into estimating roles, because that's where we need people.
So finding guys and bringing them in is the ultimate goal. Dave taught me how the whole world's going to specialize. So he's got somebody managing and then somebody doing the lower dollar work, which makes a whole lot of sense. What I like doing is, as I'm training somebody, because we don't always have that luxury of finding somebody and bringing them in, is you got to get the estimators in the field once in a while. Builders never do that. We never get the office, the purchasing, estimators, whoever, and go out and actually walk the product. Otherwise, you're estimating or you're buying widgets until you go out and see it and see what's going on. They just don't know. So we promote all the time to get people, to your point, I want them to get out there, go see what a lumber load looks like. And how I learned this a long time ago is I had an estimator, great technical, very good at anything computers, could do a whole lot of stuff. I never got him in the fields. The first time I sent him out to go audit a lumber load, he came back, he called me, he goes, "Ed, you're right. They're ripping us off." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "All those 2x4s are only 1.5 inches." And I realized that it's my fault I didn't teach them. You got to get them out in the field.
So also, when it comes to getting that estimator, that experience, we can use technology there also. About probably 8 or 9 months ago now, Schell Brothers was nice enough to just start doing Matterport tours for us in homes that were under construction. Because the days of having to send someone out to the field, they're kind of gone. We've now learned that we can use that same technology. We can use FaceTime or we can use Teams. There's all these different ways to be able to show someone this is what we're doing. This is what's really happening in the home without investing all that time for them to necessarily go out. It's been a huge advantage for us as we bring in new estimators, as we use those tours and have them done at different times in construction so that we can point out this is what's actually happening. When you make this trace, this is what it is in real life that we're accounting for.
Did we have any other questions?
It's actually time to wrap up, Monica, sorry.
Okay. No, yeah, thank you. Thank you guys all very much for joining us for the panel, and thank you to the panelists. We really appreciate you being here and sharing all that information. If anybody has any other questions, you're welcome to come up and talk with these guys afterwards, or they will be also out in the hall and around for the next day or so. So hope you enjoyed. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.